Hey there, folks. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. Starlink's speeds have increased over the US and Canada last quarter, according to the latest Ookla report. And according to that report, their customers love them. Be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So I wanted to show you this. This is the latest Ookla report. I've got it really blown up here, so it's going to look a little weird. But as I come down here, I want to make sure we could read everything on this screen here. So again, this is the latest Ookla report. It says satellite internet competition is heating up, and Ookla has exciting fresh data from Q4 2022 and Q1 2023 for HughesNet, SpaceX's Starlink, and Viasat in North America, South America, and the Caribbean, as well as new Starlink markets we haven't yet featured in our ongoing satellite internet series. This analysis includes Starlink Net Promoter Score, NPS, and I'll explain what that is and show an example here in a minute, for metro and non-metro internet connections in the United States, year-over-year data for Starlink in Canada, Chile, Mexico, and the US, and Starlink results from 3 new countries, Philippines, Nigeria, and Peru. So Starlink users in metro and non-metro areas love Starlink. Fixed broadband users dislike their internet service providers. Well, that second part of the statement, it's not that surprising because quite often, internet service providers don't get the best scores. And a lot of times it's focused around the big guys, the national internet service providers that I don't want to name names. I'm not going to name names, but there are some large service providers, the cable company, cable guy kind of stuff, or it could be a large telco that don't get good scores, kind of the impersonal thing. They're not local. I've talked in the past about how there are lots of independent internet service providers that are servicing maybe just a town. It could be the local independent telephone company or a local cable company that's just servicing one town or maybe a small area in a state. And they tend to get pretty high marks a lot of times because they live, work, and play with the people that are their customers. They're part of the community. And there's a face to the company where a lot of times in these larger companies, there's not a face and you have a hard time getting somebody. So you call in and you have to go through a phone tree of 20 different messages and don't feel like you ever get to talk to the person you need to talk to. And that's not the case with a lot of these smaller operators. And, let's take us, for example. We do help desk services for a lot of these smaller operators. Some of them do it on their own, but we can provide 24/7 end user tech support for, fiber and cable companies. We do that. And when somebody calls us, they don't go through the phone tree. They basically get a live person that they can talk to. They actually go straight to a tech support rep. I mean, there might be an occasional hold of a minute or so, depending on how busy the phones are. But in general, a lot of times they'll get somebody to pick up right away. They don't even go to a secretary or a receptionist, I should say. So that's a big difference in the kind of support you can provide is a big difference in these types of things that you would see with a net promoter score. So what is a net promoter score? You can see here, NPS based on speed test user responses after being asked how likely they are to recommend their provider to friends or family on a scale of 0 to 10. So it's basically an 11-point scale from 0 to 10. NPS ratings are categorized into detractors, and that would be anybody that scores 0 to 6. Passives, those would be people that pick 7 or 8, and promoters would pick 9 or 10, and is calculated by taking the percentage of promoters minus the percentage of detractors times 100. So it says here, any NPS score above 0 indicates that a provider's audience is more loyal than not. So 0 is kind of, it's nothing, right? There's no score basically. So they don't care. But if it's over 0, then you have more promoters. If it's below 0, you have more detractors. And this is a standard kind of score that companies will use. And I wanted to show you, I saw something here on, I wanted to find a calculator. I saw this on SurveyMonkey, just to give you an idea how this works. So again, you've got this 11-point scale from 0 to 10, and all of these would be what they consider detractors. So you have to be over 6, more than halfway, just to be considered neutral. These guys are neutral. These are your passives. And the only ones that count positive are people that are going to rate you as a 9 or a 10. So this really does tell you who really loves you, because these are people picking 9 or 10. So just to give you an example, if I put in, let's say 5 people rate me as a 2 and 5 people rate me as a 5, then my net promoter score is a minus 100, right? And this doesn't make a difference. So if I have 4 people rate me. Oh, I take it back. It does. If I have some passives, I didn't think it did. If I have some passives in there, it actually takes my score. My net promoter score gets a little less worse if I do that. However, I don't think it helps me on the positive side, but we'll see here. So, and if I get, let's say I have 5 people, whoops, I hit the wrong button there. I forgot I can't use my keyboard on that. Hang on one second, let me go back to this. You can see it there, but so if I hit, let's say I get, what was that? I was doing a 50. Say I do a 5, that's got me even better, and I get another 5 out of here. Now I'm to a 0. So I've got, so you can see now I've got 10 on each side. So I've got 10 detractors, I've got 10 promoters, and these don't do anything to me. What happens if I make that bigger? Let me see what that does. Yeah, see, I could make this bigger. It doesn't matter if I get 7 of these. I'm now at a positive 5. Again, I don't think this makes a difference if I go up to, what is that there? If I go up to 10, yeah, it's still a positive 5. So this is only, it looks like it was only improving my negative score if I was negative. If you've got some passives in there, it makes it a little better, but it's not going to make my positive score any better. So this is all that makes my positive score. So you can see now I'm above a positive. I'm above 0 here, or I'm positive. I'm above 0. I've got 5 NPS. And again, you want to be higher than that. So, you're trying to get your scores up. So you can see there I'm at 24 now, where I've got quite a few more than I have on the detractor side. And again, these don't really count. These are kind of throwaways. This is kind of your middle of the road, which is really, again, above the middle of the road if you're looking at this. So these are not your 5s. These are 7s and 8s here that are not really helping you. They do help you, I guess, if you have a negative score, but if you have a positive, it's not going to make it any higher. So that's the net promoter score. And it's interesting seeing the results here that we have for Starlink. So they're looking here, and what's really interesting is metropolitan versus non-metropolitan. So you've got metropolitan scores and non-metropolitan, and you can see your all providers combined. So again, this is going to be combining your small independent operators as well as your large mega MSO kinds of faceless organizations that people are quite often not happy with. So you can see here, these guys are, all these others combined are below -20 here. So they've got more detractors than they have people on the positive side, net promoters. And then you've got your Starlink up here, which, and this is, let's see what we got. The diamond is non-metropolitan, and the circle is metropolitan. So you see it's fairly close, whether it's rural or not rural, as far as the score here. And, that doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be a big operator. Charter, for example, they call themselves the biggest rural operator in the United States because they do have lots of rural territories, and they've been kind of expanding in rural territories. So you can have your Comcast and your AT&Ts and your Charters all being in rural areas. I said I wasn't going to name names. I'm not saying that they're necessarily all bad, but I'm just saying that you can have big operators in these rural areas, and you can have small operators in these rural areas. So you've got your kind of non-metro areas here, however they would categorize that. And then over here, you've got Starlink. And again, same thing. You've got your non-metro or the diamonds, and your circles are the metro. So you can see how much, even on the metro, what they're considering a metropolitan area, Starlink is well above 0 here. So they've got a great score here. Looks like, we'll see the numbers here in a minute, what they actually are, but you can see it's probably 30 something, and then you have over 40 here, as you might expect in the non-metro areas. So what accounts for that? Well, certainly in the non-metro areas, these are probably people that didn't have good service before. Maybe they had DSL in their area. They didn't really have too many options. They maybe had slow broadband service, wasn't reliable. So suddenly they've got something that's much faster and reliable. So they're going to be happy. Now, what about these non-metro, or what about these metro guys? Well, it could be that they were with a large provider and they were not happy. Maybe the speeds weren't that important. They were more important and more interested in customer service and being able to get somebody on the phone and how reliable it is, those kinds of things. So they actually, even these folks that are not in these non-metro areas, were very happy with Starlink, and not happy, obviously, with their other options. Both metro and non-metro Starlink far outperformed metro and non-metro ISPs combined for NPS. Metro Starlink had a score of 31.94, so almost 32. compared to minus 23.62 for all metro fixed broadband providers combined, despite Starlink having a median download speed of 65.29 megabits per second. So much slower compared to the 203.93 megabits per second for all metro fixed broadband providers combined. So at 203, I'd say that definitely includes some fiber providers in there that you're looking at. Non-metro Starlink had an even higher NPS at 42.21 compared to non-metro ISPs at minus 21.27. That's especially notable given that Starlink's median download speed was much closer to the median non-metro fixed broadband speed at 72.18 megabits per second to 100.41 megabits per second. So in those non-metro areas, the speeds are slower because, again, you're going to have fewer options and maybe less fiber, those kinds of things. Clearly, Starlink provides a much loved option for more rural, non-metro users who often don't have many good, if any, internet options. And the message is loud and clear. Starlink users are more than willing to recommend the service and love the internet they are getting. And basically this is based on one question that's asked of people is, how likely are you, based on the scale of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend the service to your friends? That's basically what the NPS score measures, and people select on that scale, and you can see that Starlink customers are definitely willing to do that and happy to do that. There is that factor of having something kind of cool and new, which can play into that as well. So you want to be, if you're kind of the first on the block to have satellite internet service and you're relatively happy with it, there may be a factor in there, maybe giving that a bump up in that NPS score is like, yeah, I love it because, hey, this is cool. I'm new. I've got satellite service at my house. So there could be that playing in there as well. I don't know. Starlink speeds increased in Canada and the US over the past 2 quarters, but are mixed year over year. So we're looking here at the speed test data, and you can see we've got Q1 2022 to Q1 2023, and you can see these are the other providers right here now that we're looking at in the gray, and Starlink is in the purple. And you can see Starlink in all of these areas declined a bit, and they recovered in Canada, declined a bit in Chile over the time, declined in Mexico, recovered, declined again, and then the US declined and started to creep up again. So that's going to happen with Starlink because it's kind of dynamic as they, number one, as they launch satellites, they get their satellite constellation up there, and people start signing up. And as people start signing up, speeds come down because you get more people on the network, which is a network of satellites. And then as they launch more satellites, then their network has more bandwidth and they can handle more customers. So you're going to see this kind of fluctuation with satellite service as you do that, or as they do that. Let's see here. Starlink in Canada blazed ahead as the fastest satellite provider in mainland North America. By the way, I have a link to this down in the description of the video, as well as to that if you want to look at that NPS calculator, if you just wanted to see how that worked. There's a link to that down there as well. So again, Starlink Canada blazed ahead as the fastest satellite provider in mainland North America. And a lot of times they're comparing Starlink to Starlink, depending on the countries, as you look at these. So here we're seeing same thing. So this is satellite versus all fixed broadband internet in North America. So we've got all providers combined in the United States. And in the purple now, a little confusing, we're switching back and forth, but in the purple now, what we're looking at are upload speeds. And the kind of teal color is download speeds. So all combined providers, you're seeing, what do we got here? So this is like just under 200 megabits per second on the download, and somewhere 20 something on the upload for all providers in the US. And it looks like upload speeds are a little bit faster in Canada. Download speeds a little bit slower. And you can see the numbers here as we go into the past. So you've got, these are the most recent numbers, Q1 and Q1. Both upload and download, but then you've got latency here. This is showing latency. And then we've got Q4 2022 numbers right here, and this kind of faded out. And you can see how things changed. So you can see all broadband providers have gone up from 184 to 192. And we're anticipating this and expecting this as different providers upgrade their plants to fiber, for example, or maybe telcos adding more fiber, or cable operators upgrading their plants through what I was talking about earlier in the week in Tech Tuesday, upgrading their plants to DOCSIS 3.1 and DOCSIS 4.0, and doing mid splits and high splits and things to improve the speed there. So we're expecting to see that all across the board. So we do see an increase there. In Canada, it looks like it went up again as well, and the upload speeds didn't really change much. It went up a little bit in Canada. SpaceX, so you can see there, SpaceX on the download side, right here at about 100 in Canada, and you can see their uploads are going to be slower in general, but a lot of times they're slow for most operators, but you can see they're somewhere in the range, but they're always going to be slower generally. And you've got, how did they do over time? So you can see that they went up, so we were at 84 download and went up to 93. Upload, they were, if I'm looking at this right, they were 10. This is Canada. They were 10. Actually, they went down a little bit to 9.6, so that dropped a little. Then we've got Starlink in the US, a little bit slower than in Canada, but it did increase. It went from 61 to 66. The upload stayed about the same during that time frame. Latency, I'll look at that in a minute, actually. So then you got Mexico. Mexico dropped a little. Yeah, Mexico was 68 and dropped down to 56 for Starlink, and the upload is lower and also went down as well. Then you got all combined in Mexico. So you can see Starlink in Mexico is actually higher than other providers combined in Mexico on the download. They're a little bit lower on the upload. Then you've got other satellite providers. So the other two that they look at are Viasat and HughesNet. Now, Viasat does better than I thought they did. So they're very close to SpaceX here in Mexico, for example, as far as, well, that's comparing Mexico and Canada. It's not the case, actually, Mexico to Mexico. So Starlink's still faster, but Viasat's actually quite a bit faster than HughesNet. HughesNet, you see, is hanging down here in the 20 to 25 megabits per second download, and their uploads are all these are pretty slow uploads. And here's where it really matters, is on the latency side. So you can see here, fixed broadband providers are going to have the lowest latency. Again, that's going to be taking into account cable operators, but also fiber, which is going to have pretty low latency. So you've got here, all providers combined in the US, latency of 26 milliseconds, Canada 19. So Starlink, you're looking more like 70, 60, 90. All providers in Mexico, latency of 44. But then when you get to these satellite providers, Starlink is low Earth orbit satellites. So their satellites are orbiting, if I recall, somewhere around 400 miles up, whereas these guys, these geosynchronous satellites, the difference is they've got one or just a couple of satellites that stay in the same spot all the time. They're geosynchronous, they rotate with the Earth, whereas these satellites rotate around the Earth, and they're huge. Again, there's like 4,000 or more of these satellites for Starlink above us. But Hughes and Viasat, they've only got a couple of satellites in places that are geosynchronous, then 20, 30,000 miles versus, let's say, 400 miles from Earth. So you're talking about latency here of 700 milliseconds, 800 milliseconds, 900 milliseconds to get that signal back and forth between the Earth and the satellite. So the latency for Starlink is very reasonable, considering that it's a satellite up there, but it's not as far. And the signal in the vacuum of space travels very quickly. So there's a good portion of that distance that it has to travel where it's going through a vacuum, which helps as well. So it's not just the distance. Starlink in Chile raced ahead as the fastest satellite provider in South America. And that's interesting because they raced ahead of themselves, really, is what they're saying. I mean, they were way ahead already of these other providers. But you see here, all providers in Chile, pretty good speeds here, 216. That's faster than, that's faster than the US and Canada. So in Chile, they've got 216 megabits per second down and a really high upstream of well over 100. It looks like close to 150 on the upstream speeds for Chile. And then you've got Brazil. Not quite as fast, but again, looking pretty good in Brazil. And you've got all providers combined in Colombia. Again, looking pretty good there. And then you've got Starlink not far behind here as far as these other countries on the download and the upload speeds. So they're looking pretty good. And then we've got Starlink in Brazil. That's the slowest it looks like in that part of the world for Starlink. And then you've got, again, your geosynchronous satellite operators right here, which just can't compete at this point. Starlink in Jamaica was the fastest Caribbean satellite provider, and again, they're racing against themselves as we look at that. So they're talking about Jamaica and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So Jamaica is the fastest All providers in Puerto Rico, you can see again, here are the speeds. The fastest in Puerto Rico, 87.21. So they're not as fast as the US or Canada there, but that is their upload and their download. And then SpaceX Starlink in Jamaica is close to that. In Puerto Rico, not too far off. And in the Virgin Islands, a little bit slower there. And then we've got all combined in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Starlink is actually above that. Not on the upstream, but on the downstream, a little bit above. And then we've got all providers in Jamaica, and you can see Starlink really exceeds the download speeds in Jamaica. This is Starlink Jamaica, and this is all of the providers in Jamaica, and their upstream is a little bit faster. And latency-wise, looks like Starlink is a little bit slower here in some areas, over 120 milliseconds, excuse me. But these other operators are also not. Well, actually, I'm sorry, that's 27. So that's the all combined, and then here all combined is 31. So those are not too bad. And we've got Viasat Puerto Rico, not looking too bad there. They're over 25. So Viasat again is faster than I thought it would be. And you've got Usenet just under 20 here. There. Let's see. A new Q1 2023 Starlink countries show promising initial results. We've got Starlink in the Philippines, over 110. All providers in the Philippines well below that. It's interesting. They've got a lot of symmetrical service here. So they're, looks like symmetrical about 90 megabits per second. So this is upload and download speeds right there. You can see actually here 89 and 88, and the latency 22. Starlink latency is a little bit high there at 162. I'm not sure why. May have to do with fewer, maybe having fewer satellites in the, yeah, that would make sense. So maybe if you have fewer satellites in the constellation, it could be that you have to send the signal from satellite to other satellites kind of in a mesh format down to a Earth station, maybe further than you normally would have to. But you've got less, if you've got less customers on that constellation, if it's a new constellation, then the bandwidth is pretty good. So maybe that's why they have high speeds and maybe a little bit lower latency. That would be my guess. I don't know if that's true. So then we've got Starlink Peru. Here we've got, yeah, so they are, I'm not sure what this line is. It must be that it's changing over time. We got Starlink Peru here doing pretty well. All providers combined in Peru, so Starlink is higher. Not too bad on the upstream, excuse me, 77. Wow. No, that can't be right. Oh, 22. Looking at the wrong one. So 22 on the upstream, 77 on the downstream. So not too bad there. And then we've got Nigeria. So again, well over Nigeria. Nigeria is close to symmetrical here too, but not in a good way. So they're at about 13 by 10 there. And you can see the latencies all here. Starlink again, a little bit high in the Philippines, but probably because they've got that new constellation. So that would be my guess as to why. It should be noted that, and I was going to point this out, and they mentioned it here, it should be noted that satellite constellations have limited network bandwidth capacity, which may affect the consumer experience as more users sign up for the service. And that's true, because they have to keep putting satellites up as they get more customers, and they plan on doing that. And then the other thing with these constellations is that the life of these satellites, they say, is about 5 years. So you put a bunch of satellites up in the constellation, and then 5 years later, you need to start deorbiting those things and replacing them. So it's not a cheap proposition to keep this going. And then as you grow, obviously, as you grow more customers, you've got to add satellites. And I think we'll read here that Starlink is also on their second generation of satellites now, which have more bandwidth. So they can put satellites up now and handle more data through a single satellite. The 2023 space revolution is off to a huge start. Amazon Project Kuiper showcases low-cost customer satellite terminals. I talked about this when they first came out with it and showed what their terminals look like. So Amazon is going to be competing with Starlink, I think, on the consumer side, and they've showed what their terminals are going to look like. They've got 3 different sizes. They got a really small one that fits on a table. They got one that would go in your house, and they got a big one if you were like a business enterprise that you might put on the roof of a building. Amazon's Project Kuiper, 3,236 satellite LEO constellation was greenlit by the FCC, so that's the number that they're looking at. They haven't launched anything yet that I'm aware of, and Starlink's already above that number, so Starlink obviously has a big head start on that. Amazon swiftly moved to showcase its consumer terminals in March, and again, I talked about that. These new terminals have different tiered models, which are promised to deliver 100 and 400 megabits per second for consumers and businesses, and 1 gig models for enterprise, government, and telecommunications applications, and that would be that big terminal that they had. Also mentions that they're going to be making their own chips. Viasat launched its Viasat 3 arrays on April 30th, 2023, which aims to provide 1 terabit per second of network capacity on each satellite, double that of the entire operating fleet. So they're upgrading things. Add 2 more satellites, and Viasat could raise the throughput to 500 to 600% of its current network capacity. That could allow its users to experience 100 plus megabit per second connections. So that will get it on the download where Starlink is and is expected to be. The question is latency. If these are going to be geosynchronous, then they're still going to have the 700 millisecond latency that we're seeing now on that. And I don't know what the upload speeds would look like. It doesn't mention that. I'm assuming it's not. I don't think it's going to be symmetrical, so I'm assuming it's going to be somewhere kind of around where maybe Starlink is. Eutelsat, OneWeb, and Intelsat are making big moves with the merger of Eutelsat and OneWeb. While the merger of Eutelsat and OneWeb has yet to be fully completed, both satellite operators inked major deals with Intelsat to add more global satellite capacity. Furthermore, OneWeb launched an additional 36 LEO satellites into orbit in late March 2023, providing additional options for its many resellers. So OneWeb has been launching satellites. They plan on competing more with Starlink on commercial kinds of things and through reseller arrangements. So they're not going to be selling, as far as I know, I don't think this is the case at this point. They're not going to be selling directly to consumers, but they will be selling, they'll be doing maritime kinds of things and airplanes and other oil fields and or oil platforms, those kinds of things, but also I believe through telecommunications companies that want to resell their service, they would be getting that. They could get that through OneWeb. So that's the plan there. And this is interesting. European Union greenlights multi-orbit constellation. The European Union has approved its multi-orbit 6 billion euro constellation plan, which includes GEO, that's geosynchronous Earth orbit, MEO, middle Earth orbit, medium Earth orbit, and then LEO, low Earth orbit arrays, and will offer connectivity to all EU citizens. Now, is this a free internet for the EU citizens kind of thing, or will it be where EU citizens can buy it at a reasonable rate? I don't know what that means. The project will support EU connectivity priorities, including the economy, environment, security, and defense, and is hoping to launch in 2024 and be fully operational by 2027. Usenet aiming to launch Jupiter 3 array in Q2 2023. So we saw Usenet is way at the bottom as far as the stats go for speeds. But it looks like they're aiming to do something here. Incumbent satellite internet provider Usenet has revealed its new Jupiter 3 array. Jupiter 3, it sounds like something from Lost in Space, right? The old spaceship, which is designed to offer 500 gigabits per second over Ka band and will allow Usenet to provide consumer offerings of 50 megabits per second and 100 megabits per second. While the array still doesn't have an official launch, the Jupiter 3 array is doubling the size of the Jupiter fleet over North and South America. So not sure when this is going to happen, and this is going to get them with these two plans at the 100 megabit per second. Again, they'll be kind of close to what Starlink is providing now, and what it looks like OneWeb, I guess both Viasat and probably Kuiper. All of these are looking like they're going to be around that 100 megabit per second range for consumers. Starlink's already there, so again, they've got. They're 70, 80 in places, and they're over 100 in places. So it all depends. Again, it's that cycle of launch satellites, get subscribers, launch more satellites, get subscribers, and you see that kind of up and down. But they hover kind of around the 100. They're below in some places, 70 to 80, and they're above in some places, 110, 120, and when they first launch. So probably maybe they're all going to land around 100 if they can get the balance right as far as the bandwidth that they have and the number of subscribers that they have. We'll see about that. So there you go. I appreciate you joining me. Thanks a lot. And if this was interesting or helpful, if you give me a like on the video. I'd appreciate it. If you're not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button and click the little bell, and you will be notified when I'm live. Thanks for joining me for Broadband Deployment News, and I will see you next time.